You want to know one thing that I really enjoy doing? It is basically just going back and looking at different games and whatnot that honestly not many people really talk about. After all, I've quite literally made a video, I think it was like last year, that's about like an hour long where I quite literally talk about One Shot, a game that honestly, despite the fact that even Markiplier played it, really didn't get as much of an audience as I really think it kinda deserved. It was a really great game in terms of the story and how it actually functioned, and even though it didn't really have, like, I guess, like, really action kind of sequences, it made up for it in terms of its story and how it decided to tell it. And this game, well, this game is a bit of an older one. While One Shot mainly played off of some of the old-style retro RPG game graphics that most people pretty much already know about, this one is quite literally, genuinely, just a very old game back during the PlayStation 1 era. A game simply known as Petscop and developed by a pretty obscure company that goes by the name of Garalina. In fact, this game is so unbelievably obscure that you can't even find it anywhere, not even on any emulation sites, which is completely baffling in my opinion. On top of that too, the only reason I even know about this game is quite literally because of one particular YouTube channel that made an entire playthrough of it. It is a game so unbelievably obscure that only one person has ever really even played it and bothered to record it for people to see. Even though this is the only way for you to see this game in terms of, you know, what's within it, it really has this power to just really draw you in.
Alright. Okay.
Okay, you know what? I might as well just be honest right here, especially to those that probably don't know about this. Petscop doesn't actually exist. There is no game during the PlayStation 1 era that was released called Petscop. It doesn't even exist at all. In fact, not even Garalina in the first place exists. You could quite literally look up both of these games and they'll just link back to this one YouTube channel that, well, basically just shares the same exact name as the game itself. And the game itself is honestly quite confusing, mainly because it already is shown to be essentially incomplete. A game during that era being released with things that are just left unfinished, apparently. But the real and kind of most unnerving part is what is exactly, I guess, discovered and shown throughout the entire playthrough that you can actually find on YouTube. It spans across an entire 24 videos, and it tells a story that honestly really unnerving and confusing at the exact same time. And honestly, it's the main reason why I even wanted to look at it. That, and, well, it's been about, what, like 5 years since this entire thing ended up starting and people were talking about it? Hell, literally when it started gaining traction, there were people like Pyrocynical and fucking MatPat making videos about it, giving their own 2 cents on what they thought the story was. And during that time, there were only 10 videos available to view. Now that the series seems to at least be somewhat complete, I felt like going back and taking a look at it and kind of picking it apart for myself and giving my own opinions on it. Also, a couple more things before I get started with this video. This video does in fact cover some kind of really dark topics, so just felt like mentioning that just in case. So without further ado, let's dive into Petscop. Petscop 1 was uploaded on March 12th, 2017, with the simple description of the game I found. The video itself starts off with the, standard PlayStation intro screen, pretty much one that I guarantee you anyone that's had the original PlayStation probably already knows. The interesting thing about it is that just before it goes to the next screen, it kind of seems to have a weird, like, buffering audio distortion towards the end. And trust me, I made sure that I, rewound the video a few times just to make sure that it wasn't just my internet fucking with me. I could dig into this and kind of, really analyze it, but if I'm gonna be honest, it's probably just there to increase the immersion of the overall video itself, as well as the series as a whole. After the PlayStation intro screen, we are introduced to the intro screen for the company that supposedly developed Petscop, named Garalina. What's very interesting about this entire series is that not only did the people behind this entire series create an entire fake game, but they also created an entire fake company slash publisher to back it. Honestly, the dedication just already is really interesting. I even tried looking up Garalina just on Google and, trying to see if there was any kind of like hidden meaning behind it, and honestly, everything that I found on the first few pages was either just unrelated stuff or things that just linked all the way back to Petscop already just on its own. And honestly, well, as we get more and more into the series, you'll begin to realize that this entire series is pretty much the absolute pinnacle of an alternate reality game, because not only does the game just not exist, but the company doesn't even exist to begin with. After the Garalina intro screen, we are then introduced to the title screen for the game itself, Petscop. We are also introduced to the primary protagonist of this entire series, and his voice is, well, I mean, let's just say, his voice is pretty fitting for the overall series itself.
Alright, so, this is just to, prove to you that I'm not lying about this game that I found.
Now, while he himself doesn't exactly state his name or really anything, he does in fact name his save file Paul, so that's pretty much what we're going to be calling him throughout the rest of the series. Another interesting thing to note about Paul's commentary is that the way that he speaks, just overall, it comes across as him not really speaking to an audience, but rather to a specific person, which is already kind of odd, especially considering that this video, as well as just the rest of the videos themselves, were uploaded publicly for really anyone to come across and see. So if this video was meant for a specific individual, then why was it uploaded publicly? We then see the loading screen for the game itself, and it's very simplistic. It's just bubble letters right in front of a gift box on a stick. Keep note of the symbolism of gifts and whatnot, because that'll definitely have a pretty heavy role within the rest of this series. Eventually the game does in fact start, and Paul walks over to the sign that pretty much indicates the actual start of the area. This mysterious overworld on its own is named the Gift Plane, and it seems to be some sort of almost like a level select thing. But it is very soon shown that it's completely unfinished. The road suddenly cuts off, and there's really only one area to actually go into and explore. There's also a sign right out in front of the gift plane that reads, "The gift plane has closed indefinitely and all personnel have left. If you're unaware, the gift plane provided homes to over 100 young pets. Unfortunately, we have failed to remove all the pets from their homes. 48 pets remain here at the time of writing. We would strongly encourage you to visit our 8 homes and find some friends to take with you. Every pet is uniquely valuable. You should have no problem finding somebody that you love." One interesting thing to note is that the numbers 48 and 8 are highlighted with red, shaking letters. Again, another thing that you should probably keep notes of, as the coloring of different words and phrases and even just numbers will in fact have a pretty heavy role within the rest of the series. Paul then walks over to the first and currently only available level within this mysterious overworld, which is titled Even Care. A very odd name to already begin with, but once again, this name is definitely going to have some weight to it within the series. Thankfully, pretty soon. As he walks in, the first thing that he is introduced to is a painting depicting a bird and a flower, and the painting has a note on it that reads, "It's a picture of 2 friends, Tonith and Randus. Are they not cute? Give them a chance." Once again, the names Tonith and Randis are highlighted in different colored quivering letters, with Tonith being in red and Randis being in green. Again, very interesting and already setting up the fact that colors are going to be an important factor within the series. Also within the same room as the painting, there's also a door that, well, once Paul interacts with it, it just simply says, "The door here is locked." Or not, but you don't know how to open doors. Again, referencing the fact that the player character doesn't seem to have any arms or hands to speak of. Over in the next room, there's a hallway with 2 signs, and the signs themselves essentially read, "When you're choosing a pet, find somebody that you like. You don't have to love them right away. Don't be discouraged if they run away from you. They really do want a home. They're afraid. Show them that there's nothing to be afraid of." As Paul continues onwards, he ends up reaching a room where the first pet is. It's a ball named Amber. Over in the front of the room, there's a trophy that reads, "It's a trophy awarded to our Amber for being a real champ yesterday and today. She hasn't left her cage once." And Paul, in almost like a walkthrough video-ish fashion, kind of goes through the different steps and the different things that happen upon interaction with the different things within the room. The room itself is mainly almost split in half, where both sides seem to have some sort of like an enclosure, like a cage of some sort. And when Paul opens up either one of these doors, Amber will essentially hop over into the next compartment in order to stay away from the player. After showing all this off, Paul then shows the solution, which is to close one of the doors and then quickly go into that cell before it closes, therefore tricking Amber into jumping into that cell and allowing Paul to capture her. Paul then moves over into the next room where there's a long hallway where there's this very weird looking thing over at the end of it. Paul shows that this particular pet seems to constantly move up and away from the player when the player tries to approach it, making it completely impossible to actually capture this one. And if you pay attention to its design, it kind of almost looks like a weird combination of Tonith and Randis as shown within the painting. I have no idea what this could possibly even imply, and if I'm going to be completely honest, I'd just rather not look too deep into it. Paul then shows off that there's an entire, I guess, kind of like dictionary of some sort that kind of shows off all the different pets that are at least available, and also shows that the pets that you've captured have their own descriptions. Amber's description reads as follows. "Amber is a young ball. She is afraid to leave home. If her home is good, this is not a problem. She is very heavy, and that makes her life a little harder, as well as yours. What's the safest place you can put her in? You should start thinking about that." It's more or less, just like with a lot of the other things that are being shown off here, basically setting things up to kind of let the viewers know what things are going to be the most particularly important to pay attention to throughout the rest of the series as they continue to watch. Past the weird bird flower room, there is yet another pet room that has a piano floor as well as a treadmill with some sort of a number screen above it. Paul does actually solve this puzzle, but I do, once again, want to tell you to take note of this weird treadmill mechanism, as it will in fact have some importance within some of the later episodes. After the piano room is the room that apparently contains Randis the flower, as well as this strange rain cloud that goes by the name of Wavy. Once again, Paul kind of goes through the different steps, almost akin to that of like a game walkthrough, essentially showing the solution to at least capture Wavy. He shows off that Randis and Wavy will basically move over to the opposing grass patch whenever Paul attempts to get close to them, and the solution is to just simply move the bucket within the room over to wherever Randis is going to pop out of, causing Randis to move behind the bucket and Wavy to basically rain into the bucket and allow at least Wavy to be captured. After this, it basically causes Randis to suddenly wither and not be able to be caught whatsoever. Afterwards, he mentions that those are the main pets that he is at least able to easily catch, and then goes on to talk about something interesting that was apparently accompanying the game that he had found. Once again, it's kind of strange that it's basically talked about that this game was just found randomly rather than apparently Paul just getting the game and buying it, or being gifted it or something. The note itself is, in fact, also within the description, and it reads as follows. The first part of the note says, I walked downstairs, and when I got to the bottom, instead of proceeding, I turned the right and became a shadow monster man. And then there's yet another part to the note that reads this, for you. Please go to my website on the sticker, and also go to Ruin This Room and press Start, and press down, 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 right, start. Paul then goes into Ronith's room, and at least now we actually know the name of this weird amalgamation that is apparently within this hallway. He does in fact start up the pause screen and then input this mysterious code. Afterwards, the music in the background suddenly cuts.
Start. Alright. So you can see that it accepted it, and the music...
And the only ambience that's left is basically just the player character's footsteps as Paul walks back to the entrance to Even Care. As he gets back to the entrance to Even Care, the game suddenly freezes on a black screen before suddenly cutting to the outside of a strange brick-like box surrounded by just an endless expanse of just grass. The area itself is extremely dark and immediately is almost like a complete polar opposite to whatever the overworld that we were just in was. After a very short amount of time of walking, the video suddenly cuts over to Paul being right next to this weird wooden door, and the door itself is closed with no apparent way to open it. And after that, the video pretty much closes right then and there. So immediately, just to start off with, this first episode itself is already a very great setup. There's no actual jump scares, and the overall, tension itself mainly just comes from just how unsettling everything is. From the starting world being so overly cheery that it just ultimately comes across as very unsettling, to suddenly being dropped into this weird dark underworld, it's already just an extremely clear night and day difference. But this is really only the beginning. Nothing much has really happened yet, and we've only just barely scratched the surface. After all, this is just the first episode. There's definitely going to be much more that we have to deal with in the coming episodes. Petscop 2 was uploaded on April 1st, 2017, with absolutely no description. The video itself starts with Paul's character just kind of standing next to the wooden door that was discovered at the end of the previous video. Nothing much happens for a few seconds until a tone starts playing and the door suddenly swings open. We then hear Paul supposedly entering the room, apparently having gone and done something in the meantime while he was waiting, and of course clearly confused by the fact that the door is suddenly open now that he has returned.
Hey, so, the door opened on its own. I was just in the other room for a couple of minutes, and I came back and the door was open, and I checked the recording, because I was recording, and the door just opens on its own. I didn't do anything.
Now, as he actually enters the doorway, we are introduced to what appears to be somewhat of a black screen at first glance. But if you look very closely, you'll begin to see that there is something else with this pause screen. If we were to brighten this up, we at least get a glimpse of what appears to be some sort of strange, just disconnected floating rooms of some kind. It's definitely something interesting to keep note of, as these weird loading screen images do in fact show up quite often. As the next area loads in, we are then introduced to what appears to be some kind of a strange basement area, with this kind of weird generator looking thing just kind of jittering around in the background. Again, there's really no other audio, not even from this weird jittering object in the background. The only audio seems to just be coming from the player character's own footsteps, and honestly, the fact that there isn't even any background noise other than that is just already immediately completely unnerving. As he moves on into the next room, we then actually see more of the weird collectibles that apparently exist within the game. I'm not entirely sure what these things are called. I've heard like the community just all around call them gifts, so I'll just refer to them as that. And what's weird is that despite the fact that this weird underworld area is hidden by a cheat code, there's still these gifts that are apparently littered around it. Clearly, it was meant to be explored, but it was hidden away for one reason or another. As he keeps going, we hear what it sounds like a telephone ringing, and, well, when he enters the next room, well, we find that telephone, and upon interacting with it, it just simply says that Care left the room, with Care being highlighted in yellow lettering. Over on the corkboard next to it, there just seems to be this kind of like weird flow diagram of some kind, with 3 faces labeled A, B, and NLM, with NLM in italics, and, well, as we can see here, it seems to be showing 3 different states of emotions, with A being probably the best case scenario, B being a little bit more unkempt, and NLM being completely broken and distraught. Paul then moves into the next area, which seems to just be more mysterious walkways. As he continues onwards, he comes across these mysterious paintings. The first one depicts just a greenhouse in the middle of the strange grassy plain that we were just on earlier, and as he continues onwards he finds another one that appears to be some sort of strange brick building. The weird thing with the brick building, however, is that the moment that it's actually shown on screen, there's this kind of unusual, ominous tone that plays alongside it, clearly indicating that this building has some form of importance to whatever is going on here. Paul then continues onwards, and there is a third painting, with this one depicting a windmill. Paul reaches a road with cars zipping down the pathway that is laid out for them. Whenever he stands in the middle of the road, however, the cars suddenly just stop appearing whatsoever, and they continue the moment that he steps off of the road. He does in fact move around a little bit, and he just ends up finding more gifts as he goes up and down the road, and that seems to really be the only reward for him going out of his way to explore this strange road area. Paul then continues onwards, and we are introduced to yet another pause screen. This time, as we brighten it up, it appears to be some kind of a stairwell, possibly alluding to the first part of the note from the first episode. A very strange image and kind of a weird way to tie that part of the note into what is happening, but thankfully, again, that part of the note will have its own importance as we keep going. Once the loading screen ends, the doorway leads to some sort of a backyard area, and Paul pretty much briefly apologizes for his lack of commentary up to this point.
Sorry for not talking very much. I'm a little bewildered, if you want to know the truth. This is a little more than I was expecting to see.
Which, again, kind of funny that he is in fact kind of aware of that. And, well, I mean, let's just be fair here. A whole lot of us are probably just about as lost as he is as to what is happening. He does come across what seems to be some sort of a gravestone with a pair of eyes on it, as well as what seems to be a gift box. Again, kind of tying the first loading screen from the first episode all the way over to here. As he inspects the gravestone, a box pops up saying, Michael Hammond, 1988 to 1995. Mike was a gift. And, well, I mean, Paul has quite possibly some of the best commentary for what he has just witnessed here.
That's a dead kid.
Anyways, moving on from that, he does walk into the shack here, where we are introduced to just some sort of a strange flower. He starts picking off some of the petals, and we notice something off about each petal that he picks off. Every other petal seems to change the screen to red, and, well, obviously the petals in between those just have the screen appear as normal. He stops after about 3 petals to go into the other doorway to see where exactly this leads, and he finds that the flower seems to connect to this individual that's just kind of sitting up on top of this weird plateau. We can immediately already tie this to the strange diagram from earlier, and we can possibly identify this individual as Care. Paul walks around for a little bit, trying to figure out if there's a way up, and then he just decides to go back to continue picking at the flower, and just to see what happens, more than likely. As he finishes picking off the petals, the last one leaves the screen red, and as he goes into the basement area, we are introduced to the Care individual now just being a weird glitched mess on the ground and not being able to be collected whatsoever. This image just alone is unsettling to look at. It doesn't really exactly make you jump, but as you look at it, it just makes you feel genuinely uncomfortable. Like I mentioned before, this entire series just mainly relies on its overall atmosphere and just how it presents itself, rather than just relying on cheap jump scares, which honestly is probably one of the best ways to set things up, especially something like this. Afterwards, Paul goes back under the surface, and he starts giving his own thoughts as to what he has discovered so far.
Wait. I don't know. So when I first came down here, I thought I was just gonna see, like, one room. Like something, but not this.
He then ends up finding what appears to be a weird secret passageway behind the shack that leads to even more of this mysterious area. He walks into this one room where there are these strange scribbled drawings of what appears to be some sort of strange object on the walls, as well as these potted plants and more of the gifts for him to collect, clearly leading him to something. He then ends up finding, well, the mysterious object that these images depict, and upon interacting with it, it pulls up a dialogue box with the prompt of, well, just ask. Paul inputs, well, a very stupid question, let's just be honest here. Like, it's one that no one would really know how to answer, and of course, the object, well, I mean, probably gives a very appropriate answer to Paul's amusement. He then walks over to the other end of the room and sees that it overlooks what appears to be a windmill. Again, already alluding to the windmill from earlier. He then looks away, and then the object tells him to keep watching the windmill shortly after. So of course Paul does exactly what he is told, and as he does so, these loud booming tones suddenly just play.
Oh.
But afterwards, nothing much really happens. As Paul continues to walk around, he finds yet another mysterious room. This one that seems to have a mirror, and on the other end of the mirror is another version of him, but with a very crudely drawn head. The room itself appears to be labeled as Quitter's Room, but of course reversed due to the mirrored effect. The reflection basically copies his every single movement down to the input. As Paul walks around, he walks behind the bookshelf, and it ends up causing the reflection to start lagging behind, almost as if it just lost its focus and is just trying its hardest to keep up with Paul's motions.
What the fuck?
And eventually, the reflection does in fact eventually return to normal. Paul attempts to get the effect to repeat, but obviously to no avail, meaning that it seems to have been really an only one-time thing. He ends up finding a note that apparently he had discovered while the video had been cut. Apparently it's a note that just simply reads, "Do you remember being born?" but of course being reversed. Paul continues to walk around, finding yet another passageway leading to a staircase. The staircase just simply leading to yet another door leading back up to the mysterious grassy plain that we started off in. And after he walks up here and wanders around for a little bit, the video comes to a close. Petscop 3 was uploaded on April 2nd, 2017, with no description. This one is a little bit longer than some of the previous ones, clocking in at about 11 minutes. The video essentially starts off with Paul standing outside of the doorway that he had entered from the road room, this time noting how he is going to be going through the other doorway that was at the complete end of that said room. As he passes through the door, there are more gifts for him to collect, as well as a quote written on the far wall reading, "Good grief and alas," potentially a reference to some sort of Dr. Seuss story, and one that honestly could easily be tied in with the strange flower from the previous video. In fact, you could probably already take a guess as to where I'm going with this, and it is, of course, the tie-in with the story of Daisy Head Maisie, where, as well as the, game of plucking petals off of a flower, and with each petal you pluck off, it either results in they love me, or they love me not. Well, in the story of Daisy Head Maisie, it ends off with they love me. We can pretty much already take a guess by the result that we had witnessed within the last episode, that the result was the complete opposite. But moving on, it ultimately leads to yet another brick building that has a doorway and this weird rusted metal box. Paul then walks into the building where he is greeted by what appears to be some sort of a painting easel, as well as a doorway that doesn't seem to lead to anywhere immediately. Upon interacting with the easel, he is prompted to start putting in a different sequence of eyes, eyebrows, and a nose, potentially leading to something happening. As he starts inputting a random combination and he finalizes it, he's then greeted by the room starting to shake, and, well, nothing much really happening as a result, at least at first. It does eventually stop, and he is then able to walk through the doorway that originally he wasn't able to go through. Past the doorway appears to be some sort of a bedroom of sorts, with a faceless kid sitting on the bed and a couple of objects on a table alongside a lamp. An interesting thing to note here, and he does repeat this a couple times with different results each time, is that apparently there seems to be some sort of almost like a random generation, I guess, mechanic that exists, at least with this one particular area, which, I mean, if you think about it, considering that this game is supposedly a game that was released for the original PlayStation, I'm not entirely sure if the original PlayStation really had the hardware to really have any form of random or procedural generation to actually be possible on those consoles. Paul does in fact note that it takes about 10 minutes for each room to fully generate after inputting another face, which I guess could potentially clear up the inconsistency of a game like this having this kind of mechanic years ahead of its time. Paul does go back over to the gravestone of Mike Hammond and inputs the face onto the easel, in which a text box appears saying, "Mike is not inside right now. He is dead. You may visit his room." Essentially meaning that, well, obviously these faces have some form of importance to them. Within Mike's room, the table has a pair of tweezers as well as a smaller version of the mysterious object that we were introduced to within the last video. Paul then explores for a little bit before going back to input the face on the building beside Mike's grave onto the easel, supposedly it being Care's face, which is then confirmed by a text box saying, "Care is missing. You may visit her room." Once it is done generating, doesn't look that much different from Mike's room, the table having the mysterious red object, but this time the secondary object is what appears to be a box of either crayons or markers. On the far end of the room, there is a note that reads, "Your wife says Care isn't growing eyebrows. You say, that's a puzzle. You're secretly very excited to hear this news. You're in the bathtub thinking about her. I have a guess at which child you'll pick next. When you find her room, the passage to my right will lead to her. She'll appear from the darkness, limping, and I'll shoot her in the head. Tiara says young people can be psychologically damaged beyond rebirthing. A young person walks into your school building. They walk in with you. You're holding their hands. They come out crying into their hands because nobody will love them. Not ever again. Nobody loves me. They wander the new maker plane. So an interesting thing to note is, of course, we are now introduced to another individual at play here, someone by the name of Tiara. Another interesting thing to note is, of course, yet another mention of rebirthing, or remembering being born, or really anything revolving around that. This is pretty much where the tie-in to yet another real-world event pretty much kind of ties in, and I don't exactly have the heart to talk about it myself, so instead, I will have Pyrocynical explain it for you.
Watched other videos analysing Petscop? I'm sure you're fully informed about this horrible tale, but to those who aren't, I'll explain, but be warned. This story is true and incredibly sickening. In April 18th, 2000, Candace Tiara Elmore was separated from her family at the age of 5. She was later adopted by Gene Newmaker, changing Candace's name from Candace Tiara Elmore to Candace Elizabeth Newmaker. Candace was allegedly unruly with her adoptive parent, destroying things and fighting other children. She was later diagnosed with reactive attachment disorder. Gene then discovered attachment therapy and experimental therapy in an attempt to reattach Candace to her adoptive mother. She was taken from North Carolina to Colorado, where Gene paid $7,000 for a 2-week course of attachment therapy with Connell Watkins and Julie Ponder. The procedure was meant to simulate a birth. Candace was placed under pillows and sat on by 4 adults, with the simple instructions to free herself. She was asked over and over, "Do you want to be born? Or do you want to die?" Candace would cry out saying she was dying, to which Watkins would respond, "You want to die? Okay then, die. Go ahead. Die right now." Ponder would go on to mock Candace. "Quitter, quitter, 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 quick, she's a quitter." 40 minutes into the procedure, Candace said her very last word. No. Only 70 minutes into the procedure did they free Candace to find out that she was unconscious. Blue on her lips and fingertips and not breathing. Surprisingly, Watkins was unmoved by seeing an unconscious child, going on to say, "Oh, there she is, sleeping in her vomit." Paramedics were able to restore Candace's pulse and she was flown by helicopter to a hospital in Denver. She was declared brain dead the next day due to asphyxia and taken off life support on April 18th, 2000. Both Watkins and Ponder were charged with reckless child abuse, resulting in death, and both received 16-year prison sentences. Gene Newmaker pleaded guilty to neglect and abuse charges and was given a 4-year suspended sentence, after which the charges were expunged from her record. Watkins was paroled in June 2008 under intensive supervision, with restrictions on contact with children or counseling work, having only served 7 of her 16-year sentence. Disgusting to think that someone so neglectful of child safety will at some point be able to even come into contact with a child on the basis to help them. There were other people involved in the procedure called therapeutic foster parents, who were there to help the procedure come to fruition, bringing the total to 5 people involved. 5 people watching a girl suffer and did nothing, and the majority actually contributed to that suffering. The only person who I'd say didn't was Gene Newmaker herself, who left the room, but still, she made no attempt to help this child clearly in agony.
Now, the interesting thing to note is just the simple fact that the entire story, the entire Newmaker story itself, isn't really a major factor within Petscop. It's mainly just kind of like a loose tie-in that could potentially lead to the overall theme that the entire series is trying to go for. It's a very dark story, don't get me wrong, but it's one that is worth mentioning as it was something that was very heavily mentioned within everyone's videos talking about it, at least during the time in which it really started picking up relevancy. Afterwards, Paul walks out of the strange building and walks over to the doorway to the right-hand side of the entrance. It seems to lead to yet another unfinished part of this map, which honestly is a little bit funny, especially considering that this area already is already infinitely larger than what is currently explorable within the gift plane. This area being already possibly 5 times as large as the gift plane, having an unfinished section is a little bit funny in my personal opinion. But with that, Petscop 3 comes to a close. Petscop 4 was uploaded on April 7th, 2017, once again with no description to it. It's one of the shorter ones in the series, clocking in at only about 2 minutes long. The video starts off with no commentary from Paul, mainly just him wandering around and going up the staircase that was shown earlier, the staircase that leads back up to the surface. After he does this, this is basically when the commentary finally begins, and Paul goes over some sort of mysterious theory that apparently he has.
So if you remember what I was trying to explain yesterday, and failed to explain, I'm just gonna demonstrate that to you now. Here we go. So I found this yesterday, and the way I understand this is, so we're upstairs right now. You just saw me walk up some stairs. So if you were to imagine what would be exactly below where I'm standing right now, and I worked it out, it's roughly the area where you have the big screen with the windmill. And so I think, so this I think is a camera, and if I walk in this direction, this is roughly where the windmill would be. Why there isn't actually a windmill here, I don't know. It looks sort of like a placeholder for it. But yeah, I think my understanding is correct. It's just, I'm missing something.
Now, the strange thing about this one particular video is that he seems to further solidify that these videos aren't exactly meant for a larger audience, and are instead meant to be directed towards one particular person. This individual is currently completely unnamed and unknown, and, well, obviously we are pretty much confused as to what Paul is even talking about. He has not in any way explained this windmill theory to any of us in the past, in even any of the previous videos. Even in the video that was uploaded pretty much like the day before, in terms of, well, the time frame of these videos even being made in the first place. It's a very peculiar thing, but it's honestly something that we should probably keep in mind, just in case it becomes more important later. Petscop 5 was uploaded on April 11th, 2017, and it has its own description that we will be going over very soon. The beginning of the video starts with Paul walking back into the mysterious room that has the red object in it. So Paul pretty much starts off by explaining how he has been spending some time asking this mysterious object various questions, and a lot of them just resulting in the answer of, I don't know. But he does in fact go over some questions that did actually result in actual answers. So the first question that he asks is, who is Tiara? With the answer coming out as, Petscop kid, very smart. Interesting thing to note, and I'm not sure if I even brought this up beforehand when this thing was first introduced, but the answer seemed to be written almost in kind of like sloppy handwriting in slightly broken English, almost like it's being spoken by a young child. The next question that Paul asks is, who am I? And the resulting answer is just, Newmaker. Following question is, where am I? And the answer that the object pulls out is, under the Newmaker plane. After the object gives the answer, it suddenly turns a bright pink. Obviously, Paul is genuinely confused by this and tries to ask the object, who are you? The object initially just doesn't answer, but shortly after, it suddenly answers with, turn off PlayStation. Paul then just simply asks why, with no reply for a while, until the object, once again, suddenly pulls out, Marvin picks up tool, hurts me when PlayStation on. Once again, it seems like another individual has taken control of this object and, well, has even less of a grasp on the English language than the object had before. While Paul is attempting to ask another question, the object reverts back to normal, to Paul's obvious confusion. Paul then asks the original object, "Who are you?" with the object responding with "tool" with a crudely drawn image of itself. Thankfully, I can finally stop calling this thing object because, my god, that is a fucking mouthful. The final question that Paul asks before the video comes to a close is, "Remember being born?" To which the tool responds by saying, "I'm not Tiara." Afterwards, the video comes to a close. In the video's description, it reads, "Hello folks, I guess this is for all of you now. The following questions are where the response was I don't know, and it's mainly just a list of various names that were already mentioned beforehand, as well as what is NLM, New Maker Plane, New Maker, Petscop, and apparently there are 3 questions that were asked after the video had essentially come to a close. Those questions being, who is Marvin, who's Marvin, and Marvin. Apparently all of these 3 still resulting in I don't know. But with that, we're going to have to cut this video short. Don't worry, there will be more. After all, I've quite literally only gone through about a quarter of this series as of now, and there's already so much to unpack. And trust me, the rabbit hole really only goes deeper from here, so make sure that you stay tuned for when we continue diving through Petscop. And also, happy Halloween, everyone.